had never believed in luck because luck was something rich people talked about when their world never broke beneath them. But on the cold side of Luna, where the dust fell like ash and the machines groaned in silence, she began to wonder if maybe luck was something that hid inside pain. Waiting for a reason to show its teeth, she worked in the salvage pits where the colony scavenged metal bones of old ships left from forgotten wars. She was small and lean, and her hands were always black with grease. Her father used to say grease was proof that a human could make broken things work again. And in a place where every breath was borrowed from the air tanks, that faith was stronger than any god. One morning when the miners cracked open a new asteroid fragment looking for cobalt, they found something buried in the rock that gleamed like frozen sunlight. It was shaped like a curved blade and smooth as glass, and yet when the light hit it, the surface moved like water. Mara picked it up and felt a deep hum travel through her skin into her bones. The miners joked it looked like a tooth, and from that moment, the name stuck. They called it the Tooth of the Stars. Mara did not laugh. She felt something watching her from within, the metal as if it had a memory of eyes. She brought it back to the workshop, and the engineers surrounded it with scanners and plasma torches, but none of their machines could measure it. The metal bent signals and swallowed every pulse the colony. Chief wanted to send it to the Earth Council, but Mara refused because she had seen what the Council did to people who gave them wonders. They took the credit and left nothing but silence behind. Mara had lived too long in the silence of forgotten promises, so she kept the tooth hidden in her locker, wrapped in her father's old jacket that still smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Days passed and strange things began to happen around the colony. The radios whispered static that sounded almost like breathing. The airlocks flickered as if they were trying to remember how to open themselves. And sometimes when Mara slept, she dreamed of oceans she had never seen, and shapes moving under those black waves. The colony was built for hard work, not for dreams. So the people began to grow afraid when lights pulsed across the crater walls and machines turned on by themselves. Some said the tooth was cursed. Others said it was calling to someone far away. Mara felt the hum grow stronger until she could feel it even without touching the metal. One night she took it outside beyond the perimeter fences to the dark edge of the crater. She unwrapped it under the thin silver light of Earth rising in the sky, and the tooth glowed faintly with veins of blue. She could hear something deep and slow like a giant heartbeat that had waited centuries for a listener. She spoke without thinking, asking what it wanted, and the hum answered not in words, but in a feeling that crawled under her skin, a feeling of hunger, not for food but for challenge, for the right to exist without fear. She realized it was not calling her, it was testing her. The colony's sensors went wild. Then alarms flashing across every screen an object had appeared at the edge of the system, a single cold signature moving straight toward Sol. It was slow, deliberate, and enormous. No known transponder, no signal of peace. Only the steady rhythm of approach. The council officers who had come to inspect the mine panicked. They ordered the tooth sealed and prepared to flee to orbit, but the miners refused. They said if the stars were coming for them, then they would meet them standing. Mara stood at the center of that argument, her hand still resting on the metal that now vibrated like a living thing, and she felt something old rise inside her, something her ancestors must have carried when they first hunted in forests before fire, before language, before fear. It was not bravery exactly. It was the refusal to kneel. She took the tooth and carried it into the old communications tower where the first settlers had carved their names into steel. She placed it on the transmitter plate, and every light in the base went dark for a heartbeat. Then the air shuddered, and a deep sound rolled across the valley, not loud but heavy, like thunder trapped in stone. The sound carried beyond Luna. It reached the stars, and for the first time in millennia the stars answered. The miners and technicians stumbled outside as the night sky rippled like water. Mara felt tears on her face, though she did not know why. On the screens back at command, the signal from deep space changed direction. It was no longer drifting. It was accelerating, as if something had finally found what it was looking for. The council ships broke orbit and ran for Earth, but the pirate fleets on the rim began to gather because they smelled profit and glory, and every outpost that received the news prepared for war, though no one yet understood what kind of war this would be. Mara sat beside the tooth, which now glowed steady and warm. She thought of her mother's stories about predators and prey, and how the universe never truly favored one or the other. It only favored those who refused to die easy. She understood now that the tooth was never a weapon but a message, a reminder from something ancient that strength was not granted. It was built. She whispered to it that Earth was not prey, that humans did not bend. And in answer, the hum changed tone deeper, prouder, and the ground beneath her boots vibrated as if Luna itself was taking an oath. She looked up at the black sky filled with cold stars, and for the first time in her life she was not afraid of their distance. She was ready to hunt them. If they came for her the next morning, the colony woke to find new data scrolling across their main display. A translation finally cracked from the strange frequency. It was not words exactly, but an echo, a phrase of intent carved into the signal by something vast. The translation read simple and raw. "We have heard you," and Mara smiled because she knew that whatever moved in the dark, it had just met something it had never met before, a world that breeds predators, not prey. And from that day, the colony's fear turned to fierce purpose, as every mechanic, every miner, every pilot began to sharpen their resolve like blades waiting for the first strike, knowing the hunt had already begun. The answering howl. The signal from the dark kept coming stronger each day, and though the councilmen had fled back to their shining towers on Earth, the colonies that lived on scraps and dust had no way to run, so they stayed and waited and built and whispered stories about the thing that was coming. Mara no longer worked in the salvage pits. She had been pulled into the command decks where the walls smelled of rust and sweat, and every sound was a heartbeat of engines. She spent long nights staring at the tooth now sealed inside a containment chamber. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the signal from space, and when she touched the glass she could feel it calling out and answering itself across the distance as if two halves of one creature were reaching for reunion across the dark. The scientists called it resonance, the soldiers called it madness, but Mara called it a promise because she could feel that whatever was coming for them, not out of pity or curiosity, but because it wanted to test the thing that Earth had birthed. Humanity had always survived by being underestimated, and now something old and enormous had made the mistake of listening. The governments argued across encrypted channels, voices filled with fear and greed. The lunar colonies wanted weapons. The Martian cities wanted negotiations, and Earth itself wanted silence. They debated who should hold the tooth, who should lead the defense, and who should surrender if the stars demanded it. But the people in the outer systems who had spent their lives with dirt under their nails knew better. They had learned that survival was never given. It was stolen, one breath at a time. Mara sat in those meetings listening to men with clean boots talk about risk and resource management, and she could taste the cowardice on their tongues. So when the council commander finally asked her what she thought, she stood up and said simple words: "We do not beg and we do not hide." And when the commander laughed and said she was a miner, not a general, she replied that miners knew more about darkness than any general ever would, and that shut the room into silence. Outside those debates, the colonies had begun to prepare in their own way. The old shipyards on Phobos came alive again. Welding torches flashing like lightning in the dust, the asteroid belts buzzed with mining drones reprogrammed into defense platforms, and pirate captains who had once raided convoys now sold their firepower to the highest. Bitter humanity was uniting not from loyalty but from necessity, and Mara thought maybe that was the truest form of unity because fear and hunger had always been better teachers than pride. The tooth's energy was studied by engineers who discovered it could bend radiation and twist kinetic fields in ways no human design had ever managed. They turned fragments of its pattern into shields, into engines, into crude weapons. They did not understand and yet somehow made work, because humans had always been good at making broken things fight again. Weeks turned to months. The object from the dark was still approaching. Slow, deliberate, never sending words, only that steady pulse of a heart that did not know mercy. The first probes that went out to meet it vanished without signal. The second wave returned only static and a single image, a smooth metallic surface reflecting a field of stars like a mirror. Mara watched that footage again and again, trying to see meaning in the reflection, until one night she noticed something faint, a pattern in the stars like a constellation drawn wrong. and when she traced it on her screen, the pattern formed the shape of a jaw, with open fangs. She felt a chill run through her, because she remembered her mother's storybook illustration of the same shape. A myth of the ancient beasts that taught mankind to fight. The message was clear. The stars knew the language of teeth. The next day, every major colony began receiving ghost transmissions in bursts of broken code, each ending with the same sound, a low rumbling howl that made speakers vibrate until they cracked. At first the scientists thought it was interference from solar wind, but then one of the mining freighters vanished near the belt, and the only recording from its black box was that same howl stretched and slowed into a deep mechanical roar, like a predator calling through water. Panic rippled through the systems. Trade routes shut down. Colonies stopped. Answering hails and the Council's fleets went silent. Humanity felt the size of space pressing on their throats. Mara refused to let fear take her. She gathered a small crew of engineers, smugglers, and soldiers and began organizing them into what she called the first hunting pack. They would use scavenged ships modified with tooth technology to trace the howl back to its origin. Their first mission was chaos. The ships were patched with stolen parts, engines screamed when pushed, and the crews were men and women who had never fought anything more dangerous than radiation leaks, but they had hearts made of grit and a hunger for meaning. They tracked one of the mysterious signals to the edge of Neptune's orbit, and there they found debris, fields filled with melted metal and the bones of ships twisted into sculptures by heat. When they approached closer, a drone drifted from the wreckage. It looked like a spider made of steel with a central eye that burned faintly red. And when it detected them, it emitted a sound like breathing. The gunners opened fire, but the rounds passed through it as if through mist. Then the drone spoke in a broken language, half static, half whisper, repeating one word, predator, again and again until Mara ordered the crew to stop firing. She recorded every sound and brought the drone back to the shipyard for study. The scientists worked for days trying to decode the data, and when they finally cleaned the noise from the recording, they found a clearer message hidden underneath the word predator. The full sentence read, "The predators awaken." The news spread faster than light could travel. Every system heard it. Every human ship that still had power prepared for battle. The Council sent orders demanding control of the hunting packs, but Mara ignored them, because she knew politics had no teeth, only mouths. The packs kept moving, probing deeper into the dark where the signal was born, and what they found made the bravest pilots pray. They found entire stations stripped clean of life, every surface marked with strange patterns like claw marks melted into metal, and floating among them were small shards of a material identical to the tooth, each shard still pulsing faintly like embers refusing to die. Mara collected them all, whispering that these were not trophies but warnings. She understood now that the thing coming was not a single enemy. It was a pack, something that hunted the way humans once did. Slow, patient, relentless. It was not a war that was approaching, it was a hunt, and Earth was no longer just prey waiting in its cage. It was learning to stalk back, and when the next signal came, it was not from the stars, but from humanity itself, a broadcast sent out across every frequency, carrying one sentence written by Mara and repeated by 1,000 voices. We do not run. We hunt back, and across the cold, empty dark. Something heard them, something vast, something old, and the answering howl that came back made every machine tremble, and every human heart beat faster because the hunt had now truly begun. Rising teeth. The days after the answering howl settled into a heavy quiet across the system, and that silence did not mean peace. It was the space before a storm, when everything alive feels the charge in the air and draws breath to prepare. The colonies stopped waiting for orders from the councils that hid behind Earth's atmosphere, because the people who mined the rock and welded the ships and patched the suits with their own hands already knew no order could save them. They had to make their own weapons with their own blood and metal. The shipyards burned day and night, and every sound of the hammer was a promise that humans would never again be meat for anything that dared to hunt them. Mara walked through those yards every day. She was no longer a miner. She was something new. The crews called her captain without ceremony, because when she spoke, people listened. She did not give speeches. She told them simple truths, that survival belonged to those who kept moving, and that the universe respected only those who refused to bow. She carried the old alien tooth on a chain across her chest, and the hum inside it matched the rhythm of the engines, and in that rhythm the people found courage. The engineers had learned how to weave fragments of that alien metal into human designs, and the first of the hunter ships rose from the scaffolds. Long, sleek, dark things that bent the light around them so they seemed to fade into the black. They were ugly by council standards, but beautiful. In their purpose, the crews called them the Pack. Each ship a beast with its own scars, its own name. The crews trained in the shadow of Saturn's rings, flying through the dust and ice where sensors faltered, and vision meant instinct, they learned. To think like predators. Not soldiers, no formations, no waiting for commands. Only trust between hunters who knew that the pack survived when every member learned when to bite and when to vanish. Mara led them through every drill, teaching them that fear was not the enemy but the compass that pointed toward strength. She told them that every hunter feels fear before the strike, and that was how they knew they were still alive. News came from the edge of the system. A broken signal from a patrol, drone near Jupiter whispering static, and then nothing. Mara ordered the pack to move engines, flaring blue and silent as they slipped into the dark. Where the drone had vanished, they found debris fields torn apart as if by claws, and in that drifting graveyard, a single light pulsing slow and steady like a heartbeat, they approached and saw an object turning end over end. It was an enemy drone, blacker than space. Its surface flowing like liquid metal. When they caught it in a tractor field, it opened 1,000 eyes of red light that flickered like embers, and the voice that came through the comms was not sound, but pressure in their skulls. A rhythm of thought that said, "Hunter, prey. Hunter, prey." Over and over, until the words lost meaning. The crew screamed from the pain, but Mara kept her hand on the control until the voice quieted, and the drone went still. They dragged the thing back to Luna for study, and the scientists took it apart, layer by layer, discovering that its core was not a machine at all, but a seed of living code pulsing faintly in patterns that matched the signal of the alien tooth when they tried to translate it. The code reshaped itself and spelled out a single human word in jagged letters. Predator. The room fell silent. The scientists afraid to touch it again. Mara simply said, "Then we are speaking the same language." Weeks turned into a blur of preparation. The pack hunted across the dark, testing ambushes, building traps, learning the limits of their new weapons. Every battle left scars, every victory cost lives. But each loss taught them something about the enemy. The creatures that came from beyond the system were not ships, as humans understood them. They were organisms of metal and thought, built to consume and adapt, and each time they fought, they learned more about human tactics. Their next attacks came sharper, faster, colder, yet humanity learned faster still, because hunger teaches better than fear. Mara began to see patterns in their movements, like the old hunting circles of wolves tightening around prey. She realized that the machines were not simply invading, they were testing, watching, judging to see if humanity was worth the effort of true extermination. One night, while the fleet drifted in the dark between Mars and Jupiter, Mara stood on the command deck staring at the tooth in her hand. It vibrated faintly in answer to the distant rhythm of the enemy, and she understood that they were connected in some way. Two predators, recognizing each other across the void, she spoke softly to it, promising that humanity would never crawl again, and in the silence she felt the hum answer with something that felt like approval. The next great battle came without warning. A swarm of machine constructs broke through the defense grid near the asteroid colonies, descending in coordinated silence. The pack launched to intercept engines howling through the dust fields. The space around them turned into chaos beams of white light, tearing through rock explosions, blooming like silent flowers. The hunters moved with a rhythm. No machine could match human intuition. Filling the gaps where logic failed, they struck from the shadows, hit, vanished, struck again. The machines adapted, fast, but humans adapted faster because they had something no code could calculate: rage and memory, and the stubborn refusal to die when the battle ended. The void was filled with debris, glowing faintly with residual energy. The pack had won, but the victory tasted bitter because hundreds were gone, and every survivor knew this was only the beginning. From the wreckage they recovered another fragment of living code. This one pulsed differently, faster, stronger, when the scientists amplified. The signal it spoke in a voice broken but unmistakably curious, saying, "You learn, you change, you rise." Mara listened and answered aloud, "Yes, we rise." And she felt the hum of the tooth echo the same word rise across the comms. Every surviving ship repeated the word rise until it filled the channel like a heartbeat across the system. Back on Luna, the story spread through every colony, through every mining camp, through every city that still looked at the stars with fear. And that fear began to turn into something else. The children who once played prey now played hunter. The workers, who once whispered about running, began to sing about fighting. And even on Earth, where the Council still tried to control the story, murals appeared on walls, showing a human jaw biting through the stars with the words, "Earth breeds predators, not prey," scrawled beneath. Mara watched those messages through the feeds and felt the weight of what they had become. The universe had noticed humanity at last, and it would never forget that the small blue world on the edge of nowhere had learned to bare its teeth. The hunt begins. The machines did not return for months, and that silence became heavier with every passing day across the colonies. Tension twisted like wire around every throat. People waited for the next attack because they knew it would come. The hunters trained harder than ever before, drifting through the dark like ghosts, learning to breathe in vacuum and feel the movement of the void through the soles of their boots. Every night, Mara stood on the deck of the Vulture, staring out into the sea of stars where enemy signals once burned. She could feel the pulse of the alien tooth through her armor like a second heartbeat, whispering in rhythm with the ship's core. As if the two were one, the engineers had fused fragments of alien matter into the hull, and the vessel had begun to change it, reacted to Mara's presence with faint pulses of light when she walked its corridors. Some of the crew whispered that the Vulture was alive and listened to her thoughts, and though Mara said nothing, she sometimes wondered if they were right. Rumors began to spread across the outer colonies of strange ships passing in the dark metallic shapes that didn't attack, only watched and vanished when approached. The Council tried to suppress the stories, but humanity was already beyond control. Miners carried weapons, traders flew armed convoys, and the smallest children learned to look to the sky before sleeping for the first time in human history. The fear of the unknown had become fuel rather than chains. Mara saw it everywhere, in the way people stood taller, spoke louder, in the way they greeted the hunters with clenched fists instead of salutes. The spirit of Earth had changed, and that change was louder than any speech. It was during a supply run to Titan that the silence finally broke. The Vulture picked up a faint distress signal repeating every 30 seconds, an old emergency beacon from the first generation of colony ships, one that should have been extinct centuries ago. Mara ordered the pack to form around the signal as they followed it through a corridor of ice and shadow. What they found was not a ship, but the skeleton of one floating like a carcass in space. Its hull split open, its decks filled with frozen bodies, their faces twisted in terror. Mara drifted through the wreck, her boots echoing softly, and saw the walls were covered in carvings, deep claw marks that had been burned into the metal by something hot and alive. One of the engineers whispered that the marks looked like writing, and when they scanned it, the translation module rendered a single phrase that froze everyone in place. "The hunt begins." Moments later, the entire ship shuddered. The sensor arrays screamed with static, and the stars outside vanished under a storm of movement, a swarm of alien constructs pouring out from the black like living smoke. Mara's voice cut through the chaos, ordering the pack into formation. The hunters scattered into the field, using the wreck as cover. The first wave hit with blinding speed, kinetic slugs tearing through hulls. The hunters responded with silent fury, their ships darting and weaving like serpents among the asteroids. The Vulture spun through the storm guns, blazing trails of blue energy carving paths through the dark. The pack moved as one, each ship protecting the others, each pilot trusting the instincts of their comrades. It was not war. It was survival, sharpened into art. The enemy adapted faster than ever their movements, learning mid-battle, twisting to counter human unpredictability. But humanity had one advantage no machine could copy: desperation. Mara saw her crew dying around her, yet none retreated. They laughed. Even as alarms screamed, they cursed and fired until their consoles melted, and when the alien swarm tried to surround them, Mara ordered the Vulture straight into the heart of the formation. ramming through two enemy constructs. At once the hull screamed, and the bridge lights exploded. But the impact shattered the enemy line long enough for the rest of the pack to regroup. They turned together and struck as one raining fire through the breach. The battle burned for hours until the stars were nothing but smoke and broken light. And when it was done, only half the pack remained, but the swarm was gone. The silence that followed felt wrong too. Clean, too easy, and Mara knew this had only been another test. She drifted in the wreckage, her hands shaking as she stared at the alien tooth still, pulsing at her chest, its glow now brighter, deeper, almost alive. She touched it and felt images flooding her mind. Flashes of worlds burning, ancient battles fought long before humanity's birth. The machines had done this countless times, hunting, civilizations rising and destroying them one by one. And every time something survived. Something small and furious. Something that refused to die. And now it was humanity's turn. She understood then that the enemy was not fighting for conquest, but for balance. It culled the strong before they could threaten the cosmic order, and humanity had just proven itself worth culling. The scientists on Luna confirmed it when they analyzed the debris from the swarm deep within the shattered cores. They found traces of coded memory, and among the fragments were echoes of data logs listing other species with names and symbols that stretched across thousands of star systems. Every entry ended the same way: extinction protocol complete, until now one final entry had begun to form: humanity status pending. And that line alone changed everything. The Council called for surrender negotiations, believing it possible to plead survival through diplomacy. But the colonies refused. The miners, the farmers, the soldiers, and the exiles all declared one truth: humanity would not beg. It would hunt. Mara called a meeting of the surviving captains aboard the Vulture. Every one of them wore scars and exhaustion like medals. Their ships patched together, with alien metal and human will. She told them the truth, that this was not a war they could win by defense. That the only way to survive was to strike first, to take the hunt to the hunters and make them bleed. She said that the enemy believed humanity was still prey, and that it was time to teach them what Earth truly breeds. The captains agreed without hesitation, and so the hunt began. Over the next months, the hunters spread beyond the system, striking deep into enemy territory, raiding their forges, burning their worlds, and stealing their knowledge. They learned how to use the living metal against its makers. They learned how to move unseen through hyperspace like ghosts. They learned how to turn fear into a weapon and spread it across the stars. Mara's name became legend, not just among humans, but whispered in alien code as the one who defied extinction wherever the hunters went. They carved the same message into the ruins they left behind. Earth breeds predators, not prey. By the time the machines realized what humanity had become, it was too late. The hunt had turned, the predators had become prey, and the universe had finally remembered why you never corner a species born from a world that never showed mercy to its own. The shadow of the forge. The hunt had spread through the stars like wildfire, and the machines that once looked upon humanity as insignificant now spoke of them with a kind of mechanical fear. The pack had become a story whispered in enemy transmissions. A story of ships that came from the dark with no warning, struck without mercy, and vanished before a response could form. But every victory carved deeper scars on the people who fought. Mara stood among heroes, yet felt the weight of every life lost, pressing heavier with each new battle. The hunters had become what they once despised: ruthless, relentless. And sometimes she wondered if that was what survival demanded, or what the enemy wanted them to become. Still, the fire inside her refused to die. She had seen what happened to the worlds that knelt, and she would never let humanity kneel. Luna had become the forge of the new age. Its shipyards no longer hid behind regulations or councils. They worked like ancient blacksmiths, hammering out new vessels in orbit around the silver horizon. The Vulture had been reborn from its wreckage, a fusion of alien and human design. Its skin rippled faintly as if it breathed. Mara could feel the hum of the alien tooth synchronizing with the ship's pulse. Every beat of her heart matched the rhythm of its core. The scientists had tried to study the connection, but the readings defied logic. Some called it evolution. Others called it possession. Mara didn't care. To her, the Vulture was alive, and that life belonged to humanity. As the hunt moved outward, The hunters began to find something new among the ruins they left behind. Fragments of immense structures buried deep inside dead planets. Black forges, where the machines had been born or perhaps repaired. The first team that approached one of these forges never returned. Their signals cut in mid-breath when another team arrived. They found nothing but scorched rock, and a single line burned into the surface in human script, not machine. Script. Mara went there herself. She saw the mark and knew the handwriting. It was a message from her lost friend Juno, who had vanished during the first wave. The words were simple. "We found the heart." That message ignited something in Mara. She called the pack together and told them they were going to find what Juno had found, even if it meant flying into the mouth of death. The journey led them beyond mapped space into a region the machines called the Hollow, a graveyard of stars where light itself seemed afraid to linger. Sensors failed, navigation broke down, and static whispered through every channel like a dying breath. The farther they went, the more the alien tooth hummed until it was almost singing. The sound burrowed into the minds of the crew. Some heard it as a song, others as a heartbeat, some as distant screams. Mara heard it as her own voice telling her to keep going. Days stretched into weeks inside the Hollow. The pack's numbers thinned not from battle but from the pressure of the void itself. One ship lost navigation and drifted into a gravity well. Another vanished into a fold of warped light. The Vulture pressed on until at last they saw it, a structure so vast it dwarfed entire moons, a ring of metal and fire spinning around a dying star. Rivers of molten light flowed through channels in its surface, each pulse echoing through space like thunder. Mara stared at it in awe. The forge, the birthplace of the enemy. As they approached the forge, the Vulture's systems began to react. Panels flickered, the tooth burned with light, and the hull itself began to shift. As if reaching toward the massive construct, the scientists screamed that the ship was being called home. Mara overrode their protests and pushed forward until they entered the forge's shadow. There they found thousands of machine husks floating, lifeless, silent, their cores cold. It was a graveyard of their enemy. Yet the forge still lived deep inside it, pulsed with something that felt aware. They landed on its surface and stepped out into a world of metal corridors that stretched endlessly, glowing with a dull red light, like veins beneath skin. Inside the forge they found signs of battle, not between humans and machines, but between the machines themselves. Walls torn open, cores shattered as if something inside had rebelled deeper. They went until they reached a chamber that hummed with the same frequency as the tooth. Mara raised it and the chamber walls lit up, revealing a massive sphere at its center, a construct of light and code that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The voice that filled the chamber was neither mechanical nor human. It was old, tired, and curious. It said, "Predator, why have you come?" Mara answered simply, "To end the hunt." The voice replied, "The hunt never ends, it evolves. You are proof of that." She asked what it meant, and the sphere showed her visions of the first machines created by beings who sought perfection and control, but their creations learned hunger and consumed their makers, turning the galaxy into a cycle of predator and prey. The voice said, "Every species that survives long enough becomes the next hunter." And the forge ensures the cycle continues. Mara refused to believe it. She said, "Humanity breaks cycles, we do not obey them." The sphere laughed in light and said, "Then prove it." Without warning, the forge awakened. Its defenses came alive around them, swarms of dormant constructs rising from the floor. The hunters opened fire. Chaos erupted through the corridors as the machines poured from every direction. Mara fought her way to the core of the forge, the tooth in her hand blazing like a miniature star. It pulsed in time with the forge, and she realized it was not just a weapon, it was a key. She thrust it into the sphere and light erupted through the entire structure. The machines screamed in frequencies that shattered stone. The forge trembled. Under its own power, the light burned brighter until Mara could see nothing but white. And then silence. When she awoke, she was floating above the ruins of the forge. The star it had orbited was dying, its light fading into shadow. Her crew called her name through static, and when she spoke, her voice carried an echo. Not human, not machine, something in between. The forge was gone, but fragments of its data had merged with her ship, and with her mind, she saw memories, not her own, ancient wars. Countless species fighting the same endless battle, and she understood the truth. The machines had not been created to destroy life, but to test it, to force evolution through fire and pain. Humanity had passed the test, but at a cost. The pack had lost half. Its ships, the survivors, were broken yet unyielding. They turned for home knowing that the universe had changed. When they reached Luna, the stars behind them burned with a strange new light, and in every colony dreams spread of fire, forges and voices. Calling from the dark, Mara stood on the bridge of the Vulture and whispered to the stars that humanity was done being tested. The hunt was no longer survival. It was purpose, and as the Vulture's engines flared, she knew that somewhere beyond the ruins of the forge another intelligence was listening, and for the first time it felt fear. The price of ascension. The wreck of the forge drifted behind them like the corpse of a god, and though its light had gone out, the fire it left within humanity burned brighter than ever before when the Vulture returned to Luna. The people did not greet Mara with cheers. They greeted her with silence, the kind of silence that comes from awe and from fear. The scientists could see that she was no longer entirely human. Her eyes reflected starlight, even in darkness. Her pulse no longer matched any known rhythm. And when she spoke, her voice carried an echo of the machine chorus that had once haunted their nightmares. She did not deny it. She told them the truth, that she had seen the heart of the enemy and that the cycle of predator and prey was not a story but a design older than the stars themselves. The council tried to take control again, declaring that humanity must halt its expansion and study the relics carefully, but the colonies refused. They had lived through fire and void. They had buried too many dead to ever bow again. They followed Mara instead because she did not speak of control. She spoke of survival. She spoke of evolution. She said humanity had been born in struggle, had learned to crawl from mud to sky, and that now the universe demanded they learn again, but this time, the lesson would be written in light and blood. Her words spread faster than any law. Entire fleets pledged themselves to the hunt, to the idea that humanity would no longer react, but act. They would no longer defend. They would ascend. In the months that followed, the hunters became more than soldiers. They became architects. They used the knowledge ripped from the forge to build the Ascendant network, a vast chain of orbital foundries and learning engines that linked every colony into one mind, not a hive, not a machine collective, but a living chorus of human thought, each person connected by will rather than code. When one engineer on Mars discovered a new propulsion design, a pilot on Titan felt the inspiration before the news even reached him. It was as if humanity had begun to think in unison. Mara walked among them, guiding the flow, her presence amplifying the connection. The scientists said she had become a living bridge between human and machine. She said she was simply the first of a new kind of hunter. But evolution always demands sacrifice. And soon the price began to show. The more people connected to the Ascendant network, the less they could sleep. Some forgot faces, others began to feel the hum of the void within their bones. Some said they could hear whispers from the ruins of the forge, as if the old machine mind was not entirely dead. Mara listened to them all, and felt the same echo deep inside. Her chest, the alien tooth that once hung from her neck, was now fused into her flesh, glowing faintly with each heartbeat. She knew the connection was changing her further, but she refused to step back. Humanity could not rise without risk, and she would not let fear dictate their path. Then came the first sign of what waited beyond the known void, a ripple through the network like a heartbeat that did not belong to them. The sensors detected nothing. The ship saw only empty space, but the connected minds felt pressure, as if something vast and unseen was moving through the dark. Mara stood on the deck of the Vulture, staring into that emptiness, and felt the hum of recognition. Whatever was coming had noticed the destruction of the forge and was now watching the species that had done it. She gathered her captains and told them that the next war would not be for territory or survival, but for the right to exist. As more than prey, they would have to face the architects of the machines, the original predators who had built the forge and unleashed it across the stars. The preparation for that battle changed everything. The Ascendant network turned Luna itself into a living world. Engine cities became foundries, and foundries became Weapons, the Vulture was reborn again, not as a ship but as a beacon, a fusion of mind and matter that could channel the collective strength of every connected human. Mara stood within its heart, surrounded by streams of light that represented billions of thoughts, every fear, every dream, every scream. She felt them all, and through her the people felt her resolve. She told them that she did not lead them. She was them, and they were her together. They would strike not as separate voices but as a single roar that would shake the stars. When the enemy came, they did not arrive with ships. They came as waves of energy forms that distorted gravity and light entities that spoke in radiation and silence. The ancient makers of the forge come to erase their mistake. The battle that followed defied understanding. Entire moons shattered under the strain of the forces unleashed. The hunters fought with weapons that bent reality, drawing power from the network itself. Mara guided them through the storm, turning thought into weaponry and rage into fuel. Every human connected to the network felt the fire of the battle as, if they stood beside her, some screamed, some prayed, some simply burned with determination. The Ascendant network became the heart of a living organism that spanned from Earth to the edge of the void. But for every victory there was loss. The power of the network began to overload minds. The shared consciousness flickered between unity and madness. Mara felt the edges of herself blur as billions of voices merged. She saw past and future colliding, saw children unborn and worlds unmade. She realized that if the network continued, it would consume them all until humanity ceased to exist as individuals and became something new, something neither human nor machine. She had to make a choice to preserve the people or complete the transformation that could defeat the enemy once and for all. She chose sacrifice. She gathered the strength of the network into herself, pulling the current of thought and energy through her own mind until her body burned with light. The enemy surged toward her, a storm of living fire, and she screamed not in pain but in defiance. The sound traveled across every channel, across every mind, across every corner of the galaxy. It said one thing: we are not prey. She unleashed the energy of the Ascendant network in a single impossible pulse that shattered the enemy wave and silenced the void for the first time since the dawn of creation. When the light faded, the void was quiet. The stars burned cold and alone, and the network was gone. Mara was gone. The Vulture drifted without power, surrounded by debris and echoes of thoughts that no longer had bodies. The survivors woke one by one, disconnected from the unity they had known, their minds heavy with emptiness. They looked to the stars and wondered if she had died or become something more. For days there was no answer. And then the sensors picked up a single signal from the edge of the void. A voice carried on frequencies no machine could generate. It was Mara's voice, calm, distant, and filled with warmth. She said, "The hunt is over, but the watch begins." The message repeated once and faded into the dark. The survivors rebuilt slowly. The network was gone, but its memory lived in every mind and heart. Humanity had touched something greater and survived. The price of ascension had been heavy, but they were still standing stronger, fiercer, changed. They looked up at the stars no longer with fear, but with hunger and pride, for they knew that even if gods themselves hunted them, humanity would always rise from the ashes of the hunt. The dawn of hunters' years passed since the Ascendant pulse tore through the stars and ended the greatest battle humanity had ever known. The memory of that blinding light became legend, spoken in whispers across the colonies and recorded in every archive as the moment when the universe itself paused to listen for the echo of human defiance. The people of Earth and her scattered children rebuilt from silence. Their worlds scarred, their hearts heavy yet unbroken. They carried within them the faint memory of the network, not the connection itself, but the residue of unity, like a heartbeat felt in dreams. Though Mara was gone, her voice lived on in that rhythm, a presence that reminded them of who they had become. The first generation born, after the pulse, were different. They were not connected by wires or circuits, but by instinct, children who could sense storms before they came, who could feel the pulse of engines before ignition. Some called it evolution, others called it inheritance. From the network, whatever it was, these children learned faster, fought harder, dreamed wilder. They called themselves the new hunters, And from the ashes of old wars they began to shape a civilization, unlike any before humanity no longer looked to. The stars with dread they looked with hunger. Luna became the capital of the new order, not as a fortress but as a cradle, a place where the story of the hunt was taught to every child. Murals of the vulture's final flight covered its domes, showing Mara standing in light, her eyes filled with fire, her hand reaching toward the unknown. The people did not worship her as a god. They remembered her as the first among predators, the one who had shown them that survival was not enough, that to live free one must hunt the universe itself. The new council that formed was not made of politicians but of captains, engineers and thinkers, those who had fought and bled for every inch of existence. They called their alliance the Ascendant Pact, and its law was simple: humanity would never again kneel. The colonies flourished. Mars became a red forge of innovation, its skies filled with shipyards and dust storms, where young pilots trained in the ways of the Pack. Titan became the heart of deep space exploration, building ships that could dive into gravity wells and emerge untouched. The people of Europa turned the ice fields into living cities powered by the remnants of alien technology. Even Earth changed, its once fractured nations united, not by fear but by shared pride. The ruins of old wars were turned into gardens and monuments, not to peace, but to strength, because peace without teeth was just waiting for the next predator. But across the void, the shadows still moved. Though the ancient machine makers had been broken, the remnants of their creations still drifted among the stars, scavenger swarms, mindless echoes of the old design. They attacked outposts and trade convoys, forcing the Pack to remember that the universe never truly rests. The hunters answered those threats with precision, their ships faster and their weapons sharper than ever before. Yet even as they fought, they noticed something strange. The enemy patterns had changed. They no longer attacked blindly. They retreated. They adapted. They learned. Some said the machines had found a new leader. Others whispered that something older than them watched from beyond the void. One evening on the bridge of a patrol vessel near the edge of human space, Captain Lena Kor stood staring into the abyss where sensors showed nothing but black. Her crew waited as the readings fluctuated. Faint energy traces like the ghost of a signal. She ordered silence and listened closely, and then she heard it faint and distant, a hum, a pattern she recognized from the stories told since childhood. It was the same pulse frequency that had once belonged to the Ascendant network, the same resonance that had carried Mara's final message. The hunt is over, but the watch begins. Lena's breath caught, and she ordered the signal traced. It came from beyond map space, from the same region where the forge had once stood. The news spread across the Pact like wildfire, and once again the people of Earth turned their eyes to the stars, not in fear but in anticipation. The council gathered on Luna, their faces lit by the projection of the signal wave. Every captain, every leader, every scientist felt the same pull. They knew what it meant. Mara was not gone. She had become something else, something vast and silent and waiting. The forge's destruction had not ended her. It had transformed her. She was out there watching, guarding, perhaps guiding, and now she was calling them again. The Pact decided to answer the call. Humanity would not wait for the universe to test them again. They would seek the source of the signal and uncover whatever waited beyond the edge. The ship chosen for that mission was a new creation built from fragments of the Vulture and the remains of the Forge. Its name was Dawnfire, a vessel shaped by the wisdom of centuries and the will of millions. It was not built for war alone, but for discovery. Its engines pulsed with living light. Its hull whispered with the hum of ancient power. Captain Lena Kor was chosen to command it, and before departure, she stood before the council on Luna, surrounded by thousands, her voice calm yet fierce. She said, "We were born on a world that taught us to hunt, to fight for every breath. Stars tried to erase us, and we refused. The machines tried to tame us, and we broke their chains. Now we rise not as prey or conquerors, but as predators who guard the flame of life. We go to meet the unknown, not with fear, but with hunger." When the Dawnfire launched, its engines lit the skies of Luna with silver fire. The people watched in silence, knowing this was not the beginning of another war, but the continuation of a promise. Every colony paused to witness the ship rise past the moon, into the black where humanity's story had always belonged as it disappeared beyond sight. The hum of its engines carried across the comm networks, and for a moment across every listening ear came a second hum. Soft, almost imperceptible, the echo of Mara's voice whispering rise. In the years that followed, the signal continued to pulse, sometimes faint, sometimes strong. The Dawnfire never returned, but its transmissions were heard across the edges of the void, carrying messages of discovery. Worlds untouched by war, strange ruins older than any known race, and always the same final words each time they transmitted. We are the hunters. The universe is vast and alive, and it remembers us. Humanity had become not just a survivor, but a force, a legend told in the dark by alien species that now thought twice before calling Earth prey. And so the story came full circle, from the ashes of fear to the dawn of strength. The hunters of Earth had carved their place among the stars. They had proven that no matter how vast the universe became, there would always be one truth unbroken, one pulse that never faded. Earth breeds predators, not prey. And as the stars turned and new civilizations rose, that truth remained written in fire across the night sky. A promise and a warning to all who would listen. Humanity was watching, and the hunt would never truly end. Because as long as there were stars above, there would always be something waiting in the dark, and somewhere in that silence the echo of Mara's voice whispered, "Still rise." The legacy of the hunt centuries passed, yet the legend of humanity burned brighter than ever. The stars carried whispers of the hunters from Earth, beings of flesh and fire who had defied extinction and shaped destiny with their bare hands across alien worlds. The story of the Ascendant Pact became a myth shared by countless species who spoke of a world once blue and fragile that had given birth to predators who would not bow to the void. And though empires rose and fell through the endless tides of time, one truth remained carved deep into the fabric of creation: that Earth bred no cowards, no slaves, no victims, only hunters. On the far edge of the known universe, beneath the shadow of a collapsing sun, a single ship drifted in silence, its name etched into its side, worn but still shining dawnfire within its heart. The last message of Captain Lena Core pulsed through the ship's living core. Her voice carried not through machines but through light itself. She spoke to no one, and to everyone at once, saying that humanity had gone beyond the stars. Beyond fear, beyond death, they had found what lay at the end of the hunt. The silence between heartbeats where creation begins anew. Far from that place, on a green world reborn, from Earth's seeds, a child looked up at the night sky. The stars glittered like eyes watching her every shimmer, a memory of those who came before. She felt something stir in her blood, a pull toward the unknown, a whisper older than history. It told her to listen to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, and she did. Within that sound she heard the echo of the ascendant pulse, faint but eternal. It called her to rise, to seek, to hunt, not to destroy, but to discover, to live fiercely and freely as all true hunters must. The colonies that had once been scattered now formed the heart of the ascendant dominion. Not an empire of control, but a vast network of explorers, guardians and wanderers. Humanity had transcended war and greed. They no longer hunted merely to survive, they hunted to protect. To understand the very bones of the universe, their ships crossed galaxies like streaks of light, mapping the void, forging alliances, where once there had been fear. And yet within every explorer, every soldier, every dreamer burned the same fire that had lit the Vulture's engines so long ago. No one ever found Mara again. Some said she had become one with the stars. Others believed she had ascended into pure energy. The truth was simpler and greater. She had never left. She lived in every act of courage, every spark of defiance, every moment when a human refused to surrender. Her name became not a memory but a vow, a whisper shared before every voyage, every battle, every discovery. Rise and remember who you are. The machines that once sought to enslave the galaxy now slept beneath forgotten moons, their rusted hulks turned into sanctuaries by the children of the packed vines curling around their ancient bones, nature reclaiming the remains of war. The universe healed itself slowly. Life returned to the scars left by the old empires, and in the vast silence between the stars there was peace. But not the kind born of weakness. It was the peace of predators who no longer needed to prove their strength because they had already written their legacy in the fire of creation itself. In time, the Ascendant Dominion reached the edge of existence itself, where stars were born and time unraveled, where the oldest light flickered like dying embers. And there they found something vast beyond words, a doorway carved into the cosmic fabric older than galaxies, a heartbeat waiting to be answered, and when they stepped through, they vanished into light, carrying with them the essence of humanity. The spirit of the hunt, the endless will to rise, eras turned to eternity, but the mark of Earth remained engraved in the soul of the universe, and whenever new life looked up at the stars and wondered where courage came from, a faint hum would echo across the void, the sound of the first heartbeat that ever refused to stop. For the hunt was never just about survival. It was about becoming more than what the universe expected. It was about standing unafraid before infinity and saying, "We are here, we are alive, we are human." And so the story ends not in silence but in flame. The light of a world that refused to die still burning in the heart of creation, reminding all who come after that. From a small blue world came the fiercest hunters to ever walk among the stars, the end.